Live, where news comes first. This is ABC-7 Extra.
Good evening. Welcome to ABC-7 Extra. I'm Maria Garcia. Tonight, a topic that shows just how much Americans are changing. Marijuana. So far, Texas has not joined the national movement to decriminalize marijuana, but a bill in a state House committee could start to change that. The new bill introduced by El Paso Democratic State Rep Joe Moody could have a big impact if it passed. It would decriminalize small amounts of pot. According to statistics from Moody's office, Texas spends $734 million a year, making about 70,000 marijuana arrests and prosecutions, many involving young people with small amounts. Moody says Texas is wasting time and money on these minor offenses. He thinks a non-criminal fine should apply, kind of like a traffic ticket. Representative Moody, who introduced the bill again, will be joining us live from the phone from Austin for this program. And in the studio, Colt DeMorris, the director of Paso Norml, which stands for National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws, and Mario Mendoza, the director of Casa Vida Drug Rehabilitation Center. You can email us your comments and questions now to ABC7Extra at KVIA.com. By phone, you can reach out to us at 496-1775 or tweet me at MariaGABC7 with the hashtag ABC7Extra. Before our discussion, here's a recap of what's happened at the Capitol.
Of petitions got a hero's welcome. 17,500 signatures of Texans who say the penalties for pot possession are too high. Supporters of reducing the penalties testified before lawmakers.
We're here to support HB 507.
The bill by El Paso Democrat Joe Moody, a former prosecutor, would make possession of an ounce or less a civil penalty.
No arrest, no jail time, no criminal record. Law enforcement's back on the street quicker. Taxpayers save money on incarceration and prosecution.
It's one of a handful of similar bills lawmakers recently heard, but the key witnesses may not be who you'd expect.
We've got a police department that says, oh, we don't have resources to investigate burglaries and robberies.
Kim Ogg is a former prosecutor from Houston with 28 years in criminal justice.
We are now spending over $10 million a year in Harris County alone, prosecuting about 12,000 people a year for small amounts of marijuana, misdemeanors. It's a waste of taxpayer money, and it's not making us safer.
For most people, it is actually less harmful than using alcohol.
Dr. William Martin has taught criminology at Rice University for 35 years.
So the laws that are enforced fall disproportionately on minorities and the poor, and they know that. And it causes cynicism.
Yet Sheriff's Association President A.G. Louderback says not so fast.
The marijuana today with the higher THC content is not the marijuana of yesterday. And I think the Colorado experiment is proving that the social problems that go along with that are profound.
One of those problems, according to Grace Barnett, with Texas standing tall.
If we remove that social stigma attached with criminal charges, we're going to see an increase in youth use.
There's never been a civil penalty bill introduced in the Texas legislature, and in its first session to get a hearing, and I think actually to have a lot of public support for it is a big thing.
All right, and joining us here in the studio, Colt DeMorris with El Paso Norml and Mario Mendoza today with Casa Vida Drug Rehabilitation Center. Thank you so much for joining us. We're excited to get to the panel, but first we have Representative Joe Moody on the phone from Austin. Hi, Representative Moody, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you just fine. Am I coming in okay?
Yes, you are. Thank you so much for joining us from Austin. So it looks like you have enough support to get this bill out of committee, from what I understand. That's what it appears.
Yeah, a couple weeks ago we had a committee hearing, and we went well into the night, about 3:34 in the morning, taking testimony from witnesses from across the state, from various backgrounds about what we need to do to change our enforcement mechanism to make it to make it work a lot more efficiently, so that we use our tax dollars, in a wise fashion, and make sure that we're utilizing our law enforcement resources in a smart way. And I think we do have the votes on committee. It's just a matter of time. Hopefully, we can get it up and out of committee into the full House.
How does it look? What are the chances, do you think? What's the sense you get if it were to go to the full House?
No, I think it's going to be a close vote, but the conversations I've had from day one, from when we filed this bill back in December, have been very positive. I think if you talk to folks about, whether it be the fact that we're spending $700 million on these types of these offenses today. You know, the incarceration costs. I mean, look at El Paso County. We talk about incarceration costs all the time in El Paso. $80 a day. These are mostly youthful offenders. They're mostly nonviolent offenders. Is there better? You know, given my background as prosecutor, I definitely saw the need to utilize our resources in a wise way. We have, you know, drunk driving offenses we need to be spending more time on, domestic violence offenses that we need to be spending more time on. Is this really the wisest use of our resources? You know, I think that message really does hit home with a lot of folks.
Now, Representative Moody, I mean, you mentioned that, yes, Texas spends $734 million a year in these marijuana arrests and prosecution, many of them for small amounts, many of them with young people. But, I mean, shouldn't it be consequential if a young person is caught with marijuana, especially after studies show that the marijuana can have a detrimental effect for young users? For young users, especially.
Sure, and I mean, you know, nothing in this legislation encourages usage at all. This is just in the way that we handle the offense and the way we enforce the law. So you're not going to find me advocating for usage, but you know, the way we enforce is something completely different. All the studies will show you that no matter what we do in our laws, youth usage usage won't see an uptick. You know, a civil fine is good, and I think is smart. I think it's being smart on crime. I got $250 fine under our bill, but you got to look at what kind of impacts we can have on people today. So if someone gets arrested, charged, and convicted, if they're a young person, they're going to lose their financial aid. If they're in college, they're going to have a hard time getting a job from there into the future, even maybe renting an apartment. So I don't think the punishment today fits the crime. You have collateral consequences that can derail a young person's life. I think those are some of the reasons that you saw a group like the Texas Association of Business support my legislation, because they don't want to make an entire class of people in Texas unemployable. That's not good for the Texas economy. We should have consequences, yes, and the consequences under my bill, I think, are very much fit the crime, or fit the scenario.
And the consequences would be, I mean, obviously the marijuana would be confiscated. There would be a civil fine, and the person not arrested, but the person who would be fined for having the marijuana would have the option of going to like a drug program, right?
Yeah, and I think we had that opportunity under the bill. So if someone is unable to pay a fine, they'd have the opportunity to do community service, an opportunity to go to a drug counseling program. So I think that's a much better avenue than what we're offering people today, and you won't have those lifelong collateral consequences that I described before.
You know, at the risk of sounding harsh, though, aren't the consequences there in place to discourage marijuana use? So if somebody says, well, you know, I'll just get essentially a ticket for having pot, what's the deterrent there?
Yeah, the laws, the criminal laws we have on the books now are no deterrent to usage. If you look at some of the high points of when we were really, I think, being very aggressive in. But you just mentioned that right now, if somebody gets arrested for marijuana use, I mean, it is harsh. You can, like you said, lose your financial aid. You can be disqualified if you're in the naturalization process for citizenship. Well.
You know, you can have a hard time getting a job. So with you know, that can be frightening, and if somebody learns that those are the consequences, that can be a deterrent. So if you strip that, then what is the deterrent?
Most studies have shown that even with those consequences, there's no deterrent effect to what we're doing. So if you look at youth usage throughout the years, during some of our heightened points of enforcement and incarceration in the 90s, that's when youth usage was the highest. So the two don't really correlate.
Okay, all right. Thank you so much, Representative Moody, for joining us. For people who say that marijuana is a gateway drug and that it's a slippery slope for some people with maybe a predisposition to addiction, maybe not everybody, but for people who are predisposed to addiction and who start off on marijuana and in a few years are struggling with a more serious addiction problem with a more serious drug, what do you have to say to them?
Most major studies on the topic have debunked the gateway drug theory. there are actually some new studies out there that show more serious drug users, those maybe using methamphetamines or prescription opioids, actually use it as a reverse gateway to get away from harsher drugs and things of that nature. So I think for the most part, those theories have been debunked, and I think that we need to use those facts as we develop our policy in Texas.
Okay, Representative Moody, thank you so much for joining us from Austin on the phone. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you so much. You have a good night. Let's get to our panel. Joining me now again, Mario Mendoza with Casa Vida Rehabilitation Center and Colt DeMorris with El Paso Norml. Thank you so much for joining us. Mario, you have a little bit of a different view. You work with people who have had addiction problems. You yourself have gone through some things. So tell me, do you think marijuana, from your personal experience, can lead to harsher drug use in some people?
And you're correct. I am a person in long-time recovery. And what I mean by that, I haven't had a drug or a drink since 2009. And for that, I'm truly grateful. And I have seen the actual process that happens when somebody walks into a treatment or any type of environment for substance and alcohol abuse where their thing is marijuana. And a couple of years from that, it turns into crack, methamphetamine, because the tolerance level of the marijuana is just not doing it anymore. I mean, if we look at if we go back to the Ronald Reagan era, I mean, whatever happened to that quote from Nancy Reagan, just say no.
Right, but I think the question is, we're spending so much resources on marijuana arrests, and you heard from some people in the opening piece say, for a lot of people, alcohol is worse than marijuana use. So why are we spending so much money on something that for generally most people is not as harmful as alcohol?
Well, I think it is harmful. I mean, if it's going to lead to something bigger, in a couple of years, it is harmful.
Okay, Colt, you have a different perspective. Obviously, you're with El Paso Norml. You don't think marijuana is as harmful or harmful, really?
Correct. As far as the gateway theory, like Mr. Moody said, Representative Moody, it's pretty much been debunked. The gateway is the black market. You go out to purchase marijuana through a drug dealer because it's not taxed or regulated, and that drug dealer in turn eventually is gonna offer you something harder, something as cocaine or methamphetamine. So with the gateway theory being debunked, it's showing that the black market is usually the gateway to harder drugs.
But wouldn't making marijuana more easily available just create new consumers rather than rescuing current ones that are having trouble with addiction?
Well, current policy, can you repeat the question? I'm sorry, I lost it.
That's okay. So if we make marijuana more available,
right.
And there's arguments that this kind of policy would essentially make it more available, because some people would say, oh, I would just kind of get a ticket instead of it going on my criminal record. Wouldn't that create more users then with addiction problems?
Statistics across the United States show that states that have decriminalized haven't seen an increase in usage. So I don't see how that can be a factor. If somebody does struggle with an addiction, and yes, I too am a recovering addict. If somebody does struggle with an addiction, then it shouldn't be taken care of as a criminal offense. It should be a medical one. They should receive help for it, not be treated like a criminal for it. We're filling our jails with people that, if they are addicted, they need help for it. Jail's not going to do anything because they come back out and they go back and do the same thing.
No, Mario, I mean, you work also with people who have a hard time getting a job, who are recovering from drug addiction. They haven't touched drugs or a drink in years, but it's on their record.
Right.
If they had if they had a joint 10 years ago. If they were caught with the joint 10 years ago, it's on their record sometimes, and it's hard to get a job.
That's very true. I mean, it could be like we were talking earlier, a double-edged sword. I mean, if they are caught, it goes on the record, they can't get a job. I mean, but I mean, and now it's just basically a ticket. I mean, it doesn't make any sense at all. I mean,
if this would pass, it would essentially. Okay, but I guess that the main issue here is, you know, the studies that show the detrimental effect on marijuana on young people, on minors, on teens. For adults, you know, there's a plethora of studies that shows alcohol is far more detrimental. But for young people, it can have lasting effects on the development of their brain, on memory. So how do we protect them if this legislation would potentially make marijuana more available?
That comes down to education, and education from parents and in the home. You know, parents talk to their kids about alcohol. Why can't they do it about cannabis? You know, it all starts with education. You know, people teach their kids about harder drugs, you know, just like the DARE program. You know, they show side effects, they show what happens to people and what happens to lives. You know, it's all about education.
I mean, how can you educate somebody on how to smoke weed? I mean, or how much to smoke? I mean, it doesn't make any sense at all. I mean,
if studies show that it does harm younger kids in a way with like brain development and stuff, then you show kids that, look, like just like you do with cigarettes. If you smoke cigarettes, this is what's going to happen to your lungs. You show people, and once they're adults, they can make their own decisions because it is a safer substance than alcohol. But you know, for youth and for developing brains, it all comes down to education. You know, you teach your kids about cigarettes, about the harm about cigarettes. Why can't you do the same for cannabis? And
the youth, they're very vulnerable. I mean, look at what Spice is doing to our youths.
I agree.
It's easy access. I mean, they basically get it on any corner. I mean,
But Spice you can buy at a head shop. You know, you can buy right now. There are bills in the legislature right now that are going to control it. But as far as Spice, you know, people are turning to Spice with these chemicals because such harsh penalties on marijuana.
And the DEA, a couple of years, confiscated Spice from most head shops.
Yeah.
We'll be right back. We're talking about the possibility of decriminalizing small amounts of marijuana in the state of Texas. You can call us at 496-1775. Email us at ABC7Xtra at KVIA.com or tweet me at Maria G ABC7. We'll be right back.
Thank you.
Welcome back to ABC7 Extra. We're talking about House Bill 507, which could potentially decriminalize small amounts of marijuana here in the state of Texas. Joining us, Colt DeMorris with El Paso Norml and Mario Mendoza with Casa Vida Rehabilitation Center. So Mario, I mean, do you really think that if someone is caught with a joint or two of pot, that it should go on their criminal record and that they should face jail time?
You know, to be honest with you, I really don't think that it should be on the record. I mean, but I mean, I don't. Maybe some sort of 30-day program would be maybe appropriate. I mean, instead of actually having that citation or that arrest in their background. I mean, that sort of decreases their chances of finding a good job.
Right, and I should say, like Representative Joe Moody pointed out, one of the options in the bill is that offenders would go before a judge. Obviously, their marijuana would get confiscated, but if they couldn't afford to pay the fine, they could go to a drug rehabilitation program for some time. Colt, wouldn't this bill, though, send a message in Texas that marijuana use is not that harmful for young people?
No, I don't see how, you know, changing our laws that harm youth more than the drug does, a bad thing. You know, the drug laws can harm the person more than the cannabis can. You know, again, it all goes back to education. You know, our resources are being drained, and our youth's lives are being cut short because of the laws.
Do you agree with that, Mario? I mean, you know, now since you work so much with people who are recovering from a drug problem.
What was the question again?
Do you think that often drug laws harm people more than, say, marijuana?
I'm going to say no. I mean, these laws have been in existence for a long time. I mean, why change them now? I mean, I totally understand the arrest on your background. I mean, maybe branded there for maybe life. I mean, from getting a job or getting going to a good school or something like that. But I mean, we all have choices, right? I mean,
what do you think about this argument that police and law enforcement, and you heard from, you know, prosecutors from different parts of Texas say, if our law enforcement could be out and, you know, looking out for bigger, more serious crimes like domestic violence, like DWI, instead of spending time trying to catch someone with a joint or with 2 joints or with less than an ounce or 2 of marijuana. Do you think that that would be a better spending of our resources?
Well, I agree with that. I mean, I'm pretty sure that we could use our officers in some other categories instead of having you know, worry about the small arrest of contraband. I mean, but we can't come up with some solution. I mean, as far as maybe set up a little committee that will take charge of these small arrests or the small amounts of marijuana that are being arrested for the individuals. I mean.
Okay, I want to make sure we get to our phone calls. We have Ruth in the Northeast. Hi, Ruth. What's your comment or your question?
I would like to know what they're going to do with children smoking and the education system, because we know as teachers that drugs do affect their learning.
Thank you very much, Ruth. I appreciate the question. So in terms of this bill, I mean, it would still make possessing marijuana illegal and finable. It would just turn into a civil penalty instead of a criminal one. But here's this concern, you know, that, again, it's how it affects young people that I think people are most alarmed with. When there's drug use at the age of 13, 14, 15, there's studies that show that there is sometimes a long-term effect with their brain development.
Of course, and that goes back to education, and that is a topic for tax and regulate, because again, a drug dealer's not going to ask for an ID. Okay, you tax and regulate it. Yes, there is alcohol in schools, but you don't see it like you do with illicit drugs that are prohibited, because there is a regulatory system to where you have to go show an ID in order to purchase said substance, you know. So to be able to keep it out of the hands of the youth, start taxing and regulating it, and look for an ID. You know, you're not going to always be able to end the youth getting a hold of it, because there's always going to be the dealers
now,
out there.
There are, though, anti-marijuana groups that point out Colorado and say, you know, there's studies that show that youth use of marijuana in Colorado has increased since they started taxing and regulating it. If you look at some numbers.
I've seen some studies that combat that and say that it hasn't increased. I mean, it's all who you're talking to. It all boils down to education when it comes to the youth. There's far more dangerous substances out there that are legal. Alcohol and tobacco. Those are taught, your kids are taught not to smoke. You know, we have education systems in place for both of those. Why not cannabis? It's a safer substance than both alcohol and tobacco. The problem with youth using both of those still exists. This does not promote the youth using it. I mean, that's what it boils down to.
It's a mind-altering substance. I mean, it triggers something in the brain. I mean, tests have shown that it does affect the mind. I mean, now you get a youth, let's say 10, 11 years old, smoking marijuana. You don't think that's going to affect his, I mean, his way of thinking, his schooling, his just of the way to be. I mean, the life.
Mm-hmm. And we should say this bill obviously is not intended obviously for minors, or but we're talking about if this could affect more marijuana usage, you know, with minors. I want to make sure we get to our other phone call. Johnny from Central. Johnny, what's your comment or your question?
I wholeheartedly agree that decriminalizing the sale of marijuana in the state of Texas is an excellent idea. It frees up a whole lot of law enforcement time. I think that the so-called drug itself is can be used for medicinal purpose, and if they're going to do it, treat it like a traffic ticket or something.
Thank you so much, Johnny from Central. We appreciate it. I mean, there's also this other point of view from taxpayers who say we're paying for people to spend the night in jail, to go to prison for having, you know, an ounce of marijuana, which, you know, they say is just not being good stewards of tax dollars.
Over $700 million was used for the prosecution of low-level possession. In 2012, there were 72,150 arrests. 97% of that were small possession. During that same year, 90% of all burglaries, including home invasions, 88% of those went unsolved by law enforcement. So we're focusing our resources on something that the laws have not stopped, and turning a blind eye to people that are having crimes committed and victims being had because they're being burglarized and stuff like that. You know, it's not sensible policy. It's bad law.
Okay, we have to take another commercial break. When we come back, we're going to take more of your phone calls and emails, so stay with us. Welcome back to ABC-7 Extra. We're talking about the possibility of decriminalizing small amounts of marijuana in the state of Texas. We have a few tweets, interesting tweets. Renee says, so how far will we go? What's the next step for Texas? Once you open the floodgates, it's over. And Angel tweets, Bill Clinton smoked pot and he became the president of the United States of America. A little comical there. And then we have an email from David. He writes, they just outlawed e-cigarettes, and he's talking about the ban on e-cigarettes for the city of El Paso, and cigarettes from public usage, and now they want to make marijuana more available. Is this for people 21 or older or 18 or over? So are they going to make DWI or DUI a misdemeanor? No, there's no talk about making DWI or DUI a misdemeanor, and this is for people 18 and over. Minors obviously have a different system, yes. Let's go to our caller. Rudolph from Central is on the phone. Hi, Rudolph. What's your comment or your question?
I would just like to know whether if law does go into effect, will it open the floodgates to the Texas Supreme Court to overturn these appeals for other individuals in the Department of Corrections?
Okay, thank you so much. Do you think that there would be a court case, or that this would be somehow fought in court if this were to pass?
As far as trying to overturn it? No, I don't think so, because it's sensible policy. I mean, if it goes through the whole process, it was done through the legislatures, and you know, I think it will stick. I don't see any reason why it should be overturned. None of the other states in the United States that have decriminalization, you know, have been contested. It's just, it would be a waste of money and a waste of court resources.
So Mario, you were saying, you know, you think this is a double-edged sword, essentially.
I do. I mean, because of the education part, and then I mean, I was listening to you about that first tweet that opening up the floodgates, right? I mean, what's next? I mean, letting individuals grow small amounts of marijuana in their homes? I mean, it doesn't make any sense.
But you know, it is obvious that as a nation, our attitude towards marijuana has evolved significantly as more research surfaces about its effects or not effects on adults who smoke marijuana. I mean, it is a changing viewpoint, don't you think?
I do. I mean, I don't like it, but I mean, that's my opinion. I mean, and I'm pretty sure there's a lot of people out there that you know, that agree with me.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there's just spectrum of opinions here.
In Texas, we have a reputation of criminalize something we don't like. You know, I was talking about that with Representative Moody earlier, and it should not be a criminal proceeding. People are going to do it. It's prohibited right now. It's federally prohibited right now, and people still consume it. It's not. The laws aren't stopping things, so we need more sensible law. You know, the whole nation is going over it because reefer madness itself is being debunked. Reagan, back when Reagan was president, he had a report commission where they came back out saying that marijuana killed brain cells. Well, the reason they said marijuana killed brain cells because the way that the tests were done, they pumped enough smoke into monkeys' nose and mouth that it pretty much suffocate them. And when you do suffocate, your brain cells do die. You know, they just did so much at a time. It was nowhere like somebody smoking a joint.
Okay.
So the results were skewed.
Okay, thank you so much for joining us. We're out of time. I appreciate it, Colt.
Thank you.
Really interesting discussion. Thank you so much, Mario. I appreciate it. And thank you so much for joining us on ABC-7 Extra. We hope you found this informative, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.